Welcome to the first episode of Legend FM Mixed, our brand new Facebook show that we have been telling you about. And this evening we're going to kick things off with a bang, speaking to a guy who has been in this particular field for the longest time, Clarence Dass. Clarence, how's it, my brother?
Good, man. Thank you so much.
Let us start this off with the traditional handshake.
Oh, wow. I didn't know this was the first episode.
The first episode.
So this could be like horrible and the whole thing gets cancelled.
This is like that. This is like we do the pilot. This is
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. We'll do the show after all. Yeah, so
welcome to the first and only episode of Mix.
Yeah. No one else is gonna see this if that does happen.
Yeah.
No, so just
thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, just wanted to have you over this evening to talk about what you do.
Okay.
And I know that you will have a bowl first.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I know that you work at the USP. You've been in the field of of multimedia production for a long time. Really.
Yes. Started in newspapers.
Wow.
Went over to radio, then went to TV, back to radio, and then finally illustrating on the side. But yeah, I do videos for USP's online courses.
Ah, cool.
Well, the online component for all the courses.
So you've been doing that for how long?
I've been working there since 2016. Yeah, and we also do like documentaries, or we do like videos for projects from overseas and things like that. To show to the donors and things like that that their money is being spent wisely at USP.
Okay, so that sounds like you've got a lot of things on your plate, and you've added something else to your plate, which is the reason why Clarence is here this evening. Yeah,
right.
Your comic is. Are we still allowed to call them comics?
It's a comic.
It's a comic, right?
For me, it's a comic.
Because I've seen the discussions online. No, it's a graphic novel.
You know what? It's a comic and it's for kids. I'm that guy. It's for kids. Yeah. You grown people, you grown-ups are fighting over things made for kids.
So, but you have been a comic book aficionado like for the longest time. Aficionado.
I'm not sure I know what that means.
I'm not sure what that means. I'm not even sure what to say.
I like comic books.
Yeah. How did that begin? How did you get into that?
I've been reading comics my whole life, ever since I was small. Somehow, I don't even know how they did this. Somehow my first birthday cake matanga was a Batman cake.
So that was it.
So someone knew. Someone knew. But yeah, ever since I was a kid, I was collecting comic books, and I used to buy them after school, save my $1, buy them from Joe's Farm, buy them from the post office. Before, we used to get them from MH, $2.50 for 5.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that.
So,
but they never been ordered, you just get what
I
you
used to just open the bags and get the ones I didn't have and mix and match them and stuff. And yeah,
so
always.
okay, so as a person who has loved comics, pretty much all your life, right? Is that what drove you to create this comic of yours?
Well, like I said, I've always been into comics, and about 2 years ago, coincidentally with COVID and everything, I started drawing a lot. I studied visual arts,
right?
But there was no money in it when I studied visual arts, so I got into other jobs, and so I've always been drawing, and I've done little projects here and there. I've done some freelance stuff, and about 2 years ago, I decided I want to be a comic artist.
Okay.
So I started drawing comics. I started drawing some online stuff. I did a Batman comic for fun. And overnight, it got like 150,000 views.
Oh!
And I did an Ninja Turtle comic for fun, and overnight it got like 200,000 views.
When you get the kind of that's not fun anymore. That's you thinking.
There was a lot of pressure, man.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, what do I do next? But this book,
tell us about this. This is the one we have for him.
So we're talking about Sala and Yalo, and this is a little sample copy that I've printed for myself just to go over the colors and things like that. This actually came about because I started studying at USP. I'm studying Pacific Studies.
Right.
And the unit that I'm doing, which is Pacific Thought, Ethics, and Philosophy, at the end of the semester, they have a project. They have a research project. And the cool thing about this unit was you could do a research project, and it was like you could do a 20,000 word essay or something. Or you could do a creative project.
Right. You could choose your own.
Yeah, so you could either do poetry or spoken word or like a painting. So I got in touch with my lecturer, Dr. Requita, and I was like, hey, can I do a comic book? I love doing comics. And he's like, hey, that sounds exciting. Let's do a comic book. So originally it was supposed to be a small comic for this project. That's why I was posting, as I was doing it, I was posting the stuff online.
The panels and all of it.
Yeah, but then about halfway through, it went from being like 5 or 6 pages to being a full 36-page book. So I was like, hey, it'd be a shame to not do something with this.
Cool.
And I never expected this to be my first book. I'm actually working on a book that I've been spending like the last 2 years working on. It's a Swamp Monster comic. But then this became my first book, so I put it together. And
so can you tell us what it's about?
Okay. So originally, my idea for the book was I was going to do something about the i-Taukei tradition of the 100 Nights.
Right.
And yes. And now the 100 Nights is sort of turned into a thing where you have prayers and things like that. But less than 200 years ago, the 100 Nights was very different. And I don't want to be like an Indo-Fijian talking about i-Taukei culture like I own it, but I'm just saying just sharing what I've learned, Sharing what I've learned. It used to be very different. So there were things like you don't eat the food that the deceased person ate, the last meal. Or you don't clip your toenails or fingernails or cut your hair, and there's a certain time you do that. If a chief passed away, sometimes they would cordon off fishing waters. So then after the 100 Nights, they would fish and have a feast, all that kind of thing. I thought that was very interesting. So I was going to do a 100-page book detailing each of the 100 nights.
Okay.
But then I only had 3 weeks to do it. So that became that idea. I was still going to do it, and then I got in touch with this wonderful man from the i-Taukei Affairs Board, and his name is Simone Sevendrendre.
Right.
And he is just the greatest. And he sent me a whole bunch of material to work to research, aside from the stuff that I was already learning through Pacific Studies. And as I was going over these 100 Nights things, I came across this story in one of the books. The book was called Ancestral Gods of Fiji. It was written in 1895.
Right.
And you'll notice a lot of these books about Fiji are from that time. And no one writes them anymore.
Yeah.
And then in there, I found this thing called Sala, which was the path of the shade. And it was a story from Ra. And it was like a story about a spirit in the afterlife and all the trials he goes through
to get to
Nakovandra, which is like the resting place of the
gods. Right, okay.
And I was like, that's interesting. But then I found another book. It was called King and People of Fiji. And that same story came up again. And this was from 1865. And I was like, whoa, there's two accounts of this story. Hey, maybe I'll take some inspiration and I'll draw this. So after, I don't grog, but after many grog sessions with Mr. Sevendrendre, we came up and more ideas and everything. So I came up with a sort of like a visual narration. So the way the book works, it's got an introduction. And for me, comics is a visual medium.
Yeah.
I hate comics that have too much reading. I like to look at the pretty pictures, So the way the book works is it's got a bit of an introduction, and it's got the brief story of Sala and Yalo, the path of the shade, and it tells you all.
So that's there.
Yeah, and then you just look at the visuals. So it's a visual journey.
Oh, cool.
And every now and then there's a bit of dialogue, and it's in i-Taukei because I wanted to keep it authentic. They're not going to be speaking English in the Fijian afterlife.
That's interesting. That's an interesting way to do it.
Yeah. So it's all visual, and the dialogue's in i-Taukei. And it's the journey of a shade from the very.
So it's someone basically in the next slide.
Yes.
It's not about an i-Taukei where he was still alive. He's actually
because the way that the 100 Nights used to work is the belief was what they do on this side during the 100 Nights would aid the spirit in the afterlife. So it's the journey, like the parallel journey.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, and you kind of touched on this when you started talking about the book. Very exciting, I must add. The cultural aspect of it. You consulted, like this is you telling your story, but you spoke to Mr. Sevendrendre and all that. Was he open to you coming into him with his?
He is the coolest guy.
Yeah.
And he is very happy. He doesn't. I don't want to speak for him, but from what I've gathered, meeting with him, he is happy for anybody to tell these stories.
Right. You know somebody's telling them.
And if you read my introduction, for me, the reason for one reason that I really love doing this book is because I love Pacific stories. And if you follow me on Instagram and if you follow me on Nerdwalla, at Nerdwalla,
shameless plug, man.
No, wait, hey, you know how I got on this show. So if you follow me with all this, I love being inspired by Pacific stories. And the thing about like the i-Taukei culture in particular, I said this to Mr. Sevendrendre, and in his email he even commented on it, was there's no avenue for these stories.
Very true.
You know what I mean? Like every Diwali, you learn about Rama and he goes into exile for 40 nights. He comes back, we
All
celebrate,
of that.
we can learn about Muhammad, we learn about all the Christian things. But you never sit down and talk about like, hey, who's Yalo? Or who's Dimba, the ferryman? Like these all these stories that are sort of, there's no avenue for them.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, and I don't mean this as a diss, but like I'm not an expert. I've only done one unit, but from what I've been studying, it's like back in the day, there was no religion. It was a way of life,
Right.
And then there was all these stories that sort of that sort of spawned from this way of life. And,
Right.
when the outside religion came in, a lot of these stories sort of they got put on the back burner, or they got replaced, or they became like heathen or pagan or whatever. You know, and people don't talk about them, you know. But and I wanted to just make something that people could like look at and talk about.
Yeah, I guess that's actually. Let me give you some time to drink. But what I wanted to ask you was, why do it in the first place? Why do this story in the first place?
Because we have such interesting stories in the Pacific, and like in this one in particular, like Sala and Yalo, when I was talking to Mr. Sevendrendre, he was saying like we have these stories, but there's no visual aspect for them. No one's ever sat down and drawn them. So all the characters in the book, they've never been. They have no physical form. No one has any visuals of them. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to draw this book and have people pick it up and be like, oh, okay, this is my take on it, you know, and just give some visual representation for something, and then people can go and talk about it and share it, you know?
Yeah.
And even if someone picks it up and someone from Ryan is like, hey man, this is BS, and then it's like, then you tell the story.
Right.
Then you share it. And I want people to talk about these things.
Yeah.
And it's like, because we are so surrounded by stories from all over the world.
We don't tell our own.
Like we watched the TV show Vikings.
Yeah.
And it's just like some gang who would like loot and rape and do things from Norway, and we're like, man, this is the best thing ever, you know. And or we watch like or like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And Tolkien was just inspired by Anglo-Saxon tales and Viking tales.
And he created this whole new
and
world.
imagine like 10, 15, 20 years from now, when people start telling stories based on stuff in the Pacific, you know?
I mean, so that's what you want. Like, whatever the reaction, you want it to be a reaction.
I want people to just go out and find out more about these stories.
Yeah.
You know?
Where do you find these stories, though?
Well, there's so many books. The University of the South Pacific has a wonderful Pacific section, the Pacific Library. So there's a lot of books in there that you can do. Sometimes even simple Google searches will give you these books that are so old that you can get the whole PDF for free.
For free.
And the two that I would recommend would be The King and People of Fiji and The Ancestral Gods of Fiji. Because there's a lot of other books that sort of have a negative connotation when they tell stories, you know?
Especially the pre-Christian stories.
Especially like the Christian stuff, you know? Again, no diss to Christianity, but they have like sort of like a motive, you know?
Yeah, they're motive to tell those stories.
These two books were sort of like, they're from an anthropological standpoint.
So they just tell the story.
They're just like somebody, and the way the stories were told, they went and they spoke to people and they gathered the stories, and here it is, you know? And the thing is, some of these stories might be BS, like maybe like, hey, yeah, you know, this is what happens, and it's like, but someone told this story. And even with the characters for the book, if you look at the characters, like for example, the ferryman, right? I didn't just pull the character out of thin air. I actually went and I based him on old Fijian statues.
Oh.
So I wanted everything in the book to be rooted in something from Fiji.
Oh, you know? Cool. So that's the ferryman there.
So the ferryman there, like he doesn't look like this, but I wanted him to look like. So I looked at like old effigy statues, and these statues are actually there's 8 of them in Birmingham, and I managed to get permission to use the picture, and even the Yalo, I based it on the serving bowls. So I wanted everything to sort of be rooted in some kind of. Like something from Fiji, you know?
Okay, that's interesting, man. That's really interesting.
And and I was like, there's so many things that I wanted to include, and
So is this it, or is there? I mean, is this the?
Well, I've got 4 more units,
right?
So probably 4 more projects, and I'll do them. And I'll do, you know, like.
Okay, so you're actually doing your
I plan to do more.
Right.
I plan to do more. Yeah, for sure.
And that's going to be a different story, or will a continuation?
It really.
Of this one?
I'm at the moment.
It depends on what
I hope I can sort of tie them in. That would be really cool. You know, if I can have like one big. Mythology thing in one. That would be really cool. So at the moment, I'm not sure, but I definitely have other stories that I want to tell that are sort of based in Fiji. Not all of them sort of coming from like a specific story, but just sort of inspired by things that are happening in Fiji and things like that.
How long did this take you to?
I drew this in 3 weeks, but that was me drawing like pretty much every night, and then I drew the last 3 pages over one weekend.
Right.
And my hand almost fell off.
Yeah, okay, so that's what I want to ask. When you say you drew them, what do you literally drew them?
I literally sat down and drew them, yeah.
Damn.
So, yeah.
I thought you guys use computers and all these
Well,
things.
I drew it on a tablet, but it's still with a pen.
Right,
You sketch it,
actual,
you ink it, you color it. So a long time ago, I watched a video online. There's a guy named Jim Lee, who was like a massive comic artist back in the 90s.
Yeah.
He drew X-Men #1, which sold like 8 million copies. And he's like at one point he was I think he was the CEO or chief editor for DC Comics. I saw an interview with him, and he was saying, if you want to get into comics, it's good to be a good artist. But one thing they look for is someone who can draw 21 pages in like a month.
Because you need to, okay.
So if you can dish out 1 page a night and make your deadline to have the comic out next month, you know, so that's one thing
So
that I wanted to do. I wanted to try and do 1 page a night. And so I would do like, I pretty much did like 1 or 2 pages a night whenever I could.
Drawing with pictures, were you, I don't know, a bit of a superstitious, but did it feel like you were channeling or, I mean?
You know, to be honest, when I was drawing it, the book kind of just did take on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And I draw a lot in my head. So when I'm on the bus or in the taxi or when I'm having dinner, my wife would be like, "Hey, are you here? What's happening?" You know, I was like, "Oh, sorry, I was drawing in my head." You know, it kind of just once it started, it just went. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel the 3 weeks, and even to the point where I wasn't just trying to finish it. Like for example, the last weekend it was due like on a Tuesday, and the weekend before that I had 4 pages left.
Right.
But I had met with Mr. Sevendrendra, and I had more inspiration, and then it became 6 pages, and I was like, screw it, I'll just draw it. It wasn't like a limit.
Right.
I didn't plan for it to be like a big book. It just kept coming.
Well, like you said, like it took on a life of its own.
Yeah.
It's going to be very interesting. I'm just thinking about further down the line when you do those other units, like what stories you will tell by then, eh?
Yeah, and I wanted to have like a nice visual narrative as well, so I let the panels breathe.
I like the colors.
You know,
the colors are really.
Oh yeah, the colors, like when I do our world is in moonlight, and then the other world is in red. And the way I saw it was like I was kind of inspired by like a bit of Dante's Inferno, like at the midpoint in his journey through life. You know, so it was like a sunset. It's the end of his life. It's the end of the day. You know, so sunset. So I chose like the sunset colors to represent the
afterlife.
The afterlife, yeah.
Oh, so our world is in the
It's like by moonlight, yeah.
Ah,
by moonlight.
I was gonna actually ask that.
Yeah, and then and I actually made a color palette for it and everything. It's the first time I did that, so I wanted all the colors to sort of mix with the reds, the greens. Everything is a certain shade that would go well with the book. And for my research, I was looking at a lot of European comics.
Right.
European comics tend to have a lot of less dialogue, more visual narratives. So
Okay.
I was looking at like Tintin.
Oh, right.
I was looking at, I looked at animation as well. There's a guy named Gendy Tartakovsky, his animation Primal and Samurai Jack. You know,
Samurai
like
Jack,
very
okay.
little dialogue, a lot of action, you know? So.
But is this your usual style of drawing or?
For this one, I wanted that sort of simple European line, like Tintin style.
Yeah.
That cartoon look. So I don't usually draw like that. Some places I did sort of go back to my old style. There's a character here that I sort of like aped out and just made it a little bit more detailed.
Swamp monster.
This is a character called Nino. She lives in this forest, and there's a bit in the story which tries to grab the shade and bite him and scare him, and yeah.
Oh, so, but I mean, I knew you were working on it. I didn't have to realize that you'd gotten this far, man.
Oh yeah, I love comic books. It's a passion of mine, and I never planned for this book to be my first book, but here it is.
How do you think people will take it? Generally speaking, I mean, because I would assume the gang web series will have time for you to explain it to them and all.
If you read through the whole thing, the pictures alone will serve you well without reading the introduction. I mean, there's a few places that you need to know the context, and context is everything when it comes to different cultures.
Yeah.
So there's a bit here which involves a ceremony of the wife joining him. I don't know how much I want to spoil. There's some bits you
keep something mysterious.
But as much as there's only a little bit you got to read in the beginning to get the context of everything that's happening in the book. But the reaction, I have no idea. But I'm in a couple of comic forums online, both on Reddit and just traditional forum pages and Facebook pages. And the reaction from the comic artists overseas have been very positive.
Right.
But they don't know the Fiji side of it, you know?
Yeah.
But from an art standpoint, it's been well received so far. In fact, when I put it up, there was a publisher called Living the Line Publishing.
Yeah.
And he got in touch with me. He's like, hey, can I have a look at your book? We might be interested in publishing it.
Wow.
So I was like, oh, okay. So I sent it to him, and
this is overseas.
Overseas, from San Diego. I sent it to him, and he loved it. He wrote back to me saying, I love it. This is
seriously.
Yeah.
But they're gonna publish it.
Well, so basically they got in touch with me. I sent it over to them. They had a look at it. They loved it. And they said they wanted to publish it. They wanted to solicit the book and publish it for me.
Cool.
Before that, I was thinking of doing either a Kickstarter, because it's very expensive printing books in Fiji.
It is.
At first, I was like, oh, print a couple of 100 copies. I'm like, hey, how much for 100 copies? Oh, it's $2,000. Oh, okay. Never mind.
Hold on.
Maybe I'll just draw 200 copies. But so he approached me. I sent it to him. He liked it, and now we're sort of just negotiating a contract. But I'm happy to go with him.
Cool,
and if everything works out, they're gonna print a couple of 1,000 copies by November.
Nice.
And they'll do and the cool thing is the company is called Living the Line Books, and they've done a lot of books, and they actually have a book that's up for an Eisner Award. And the Eisner Award is like the Academy Awards of comics.
So it's a big deal.
It's a big deal. So and they distribute through this thing called Diamond Distribution, which is probably the biggest distribution in. They do DC and Marvel.
They're legit, man.
They're legit. So they and then.
I was about to ask, please don't you be some.
So they also there's also like they'll do promotions, they'll do interviews, they'll do website stuff. They'll send the book to critics. And they'll send the book to other creatives and stuff, and get the blurbs and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Is it? Will you make some money from it? You reckon?
Yeah.
No, I mean, no.
Okay. I don't know. It's like
it would be nice.
It depends on how many. In the beginning, I'm happy to just create it and give it and not give it out, but people to I just want people to read it.
Yeah.
I want people to read it. But with this, if I do make it, if it goes huge, I might make a lot of money. But if people just buy some, I'll
but the satisfaction of knowing that
but
you
for me,
made
I just
it,
want people to read it.
Yeah,
I want people to
cool,
pick it up, and just the idea of just an idea of a publisher. Like wanting to publish this book.
Like a real publisher. Dear Mr. Dass.
Yeah. It's one.
Cool.
The guy, his name is Sean. We had a Zoom session, and when I was talking to him, he just got the book. He's like, oh, I see the influence from the anime. I see this influence. I saw the colors, and I was like, yeah, you get it. Like you get everything that I wanted to pour into this book. So that was pretty cool. And then a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine named Andrew, he actually had sent samples of the book to some New Zealand publishers as well. And they got back to me as well, and they liked it as well.
Right,
and
cool.
in fact, even to the point where I had artists from New Zealand messaging me on Instagram saying, "Hey, we saw the book, and hey, congratulations!" And I was like, "Oh wow, thank you." So this gang have like 100,000, 200,000 followers on Instagram and stuff, and they were like, "Oh, we saw the book," and I was like, "Hey, man, just share it, man. Why don't you share it?" But like,
don't just tell me you saw it. Share it.
It's nice to have that it's getting out there,
Yeah, and from people you respect in a professional capacity for what they do.
Exactly, and because the funny thing is, the reason I've been working on my own book for about 2 years is because. No matter, I probably started on it maybe 4 or 5 times or 6 times. Like my wife's always telling me, just finish this book. But like sometimes I just don't feel like I'm good enough for it.
All right.
No matter how much I draw, I don't feel like I'm good enough to put out a book. And just to have people like publishers and people who have worked with other books to be like, hey, this is great, we want to publish it. It's like, it feels nice.
At the very least, it'll be interesting. Whatever happens from here on out is going to be interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, it's a research project. I spent 3 weeks on it. This is, you were saying, what if it's a scam or whatever, But I actually told the publisher, I said, this is all new to me. Maybe that's like my Fijian naivety. But like I was like, this is all new to me, and it's a learning experience for me. So I'm gonna learn with you, gang, you know. And he was like, and he talked me through the whole thing, and he was like, he was very happy with. The thing is, there's another artist named Dan Simons who used to write this book called Cerebrus back in the 80s, and he is very anti-establishment. Right. He's very indie, and he hates working for big corporations. And they worked with him. So for him to be working with them, it kind of goes to show these guys know what they're doing. You know?
Cool.
Yeah.
So who, like, if you had to thank anybody for this, who would you thank? Like, who helped you?
Well, I mean, for one thing, I would thank the people over at Pacific Studies at USP for giving me the opportunity to actually do this book as a research project.
Yeah.
And a big thank you, I mean, of course, to my friends and my family and my wife for putting up with me. You know, I'm supposed to be
tortured artist.
I'm supposed to be water blasting, but I'm drawing tonight. Definitely Mr. Sevendrendre from i-Taukei Affairs. He was, as soon as I emailed him, at first he was like, I was like, hey, can we meet up? And he's like, oh, I'm busy. But here's all this information. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. And he just kept sending me stuff. He kept sending me in his, every little detail he would find about the 100 Nights and or about anything to relate with what I was. He would just keep sending it to me. And then we would meet, and he would he would take out his time, and we would sit down for 3 hours not every night, but we would meet maybe once or twice a week, and we would talk about these books, about these stories, and he was just so open to it, you know.
Very lucky to have a resource like that.
Definitely. Yeah? He was probably the best resource. Yeah.
All right, sitting down with Clarence Dass for our first episode of Legend FM Mix. But Clarence, thank you so much for coming in this evening.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting times ahead for you. When you're a multi-millionaire type.
This is the first. Let's see how it goes. The dream is to draw full time.
That's the dream.
Yeah.
We wish you all the best with that. Man.
Thank you so much for having me it's a pleasure. Thank you for taking it.
And I mean, we need to catch up again once you hit the fourth story.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
that's going to be very interesting to see where you are at that stage.
Yeah. Or maybe even when it goes to print, we see what the reception's like. You know?
It's good. But like I said, it's going to be interesting.
Right.
And that's the best we can hope for.
I'm very eager to see the local. Thing.
And then finish your book, man.
I know. I will.
One of these days.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming in this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Let's have a bowl.
All right.
And we'll catch up again next week for episode 2 of Legend FM Mix. Right now, Clarence and I are going to discuss the finer intricacies of geekdom in the 21st century. Something like that.
Oh, a lot of geeks in Fiji now.
Yeah, a lot of geeks. What do you think of it though? You think maybe it's gone too far?